to do the introduction of our speaker. And I think she probably knows more about him than anybody else here. So she's going to do it.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Well, he's an certificated flight instrument instructor, a multi-engine instructor, board member of the Lucille Wright Air Museum, an author, a Price is Right winner, and our oldest child. Let's welcome Mike Johnson, Jr.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for being here. Can everybody hear me okay? I know we're going to have to. Okay, good. There's no way they need to turn it up. Hey guys, can you guys turn it up a little bit? Or whoever has the iPad there that controls that, you turn the volume up a little bit?
I think that was the max.
Oh, it's on the max? Okay, well, I'll yell.
Yeah.
So as my mom introduced me there, a really nice introduction. My name is Mike Johnson. I'm a flight instructor with Majestic Aviation up the Jamestown Airport. We also operate out of Dunkirk as well. And I wrote the history of the Jamestown Airport. Can anybody guess what the book's about? So I thought today I'd give you a little kind of a brief history of the airport, as well as aviation in this area. So it's actually great that we're in Celoron because the early aviation really started here. In 1897 to 1899, there were, 1897 to 1899, we had some balloon ascents that occurred not too far from where we're sitting, pretty much right over there about where the park is now. They would do some balloon ascents, some without people in them, some with people, so that was kind of the early aircraft that were flown in Chautauqua County. However, for fixed-wing aircraft, the first fixed-wing aircraft to ever fly was Cal Rogers, who on September 28, 1911, at 11:10 a.m., flew over Jamestown and Lakewood, New York, doing his cross-country flight from New York City to Long Beach, California. And what he flew was called the Vin Fizz, which was it was a Wright Flyer, and it was sponsored by a soft drink company called Vin Fizz, and it was a really interesting photo, and I'll show that to you here in a second, actually. That's Cal Rogers there with the Vin Fizz. So he flew that thing all the way across the country. He crashed 4 times along the way. But he did. It was the first cross. It was the first transcontinental crossing. So that was really cool. And he claimed the $50,000 grand prize that was awarded by William Randolph Hearst to be able to do this feat. So now major crowds when he flew over, people in Jamestown and Lakewood were coming out with whistles. They'd whistle as he flew over. But he never landed here. So at this point, we're at 1911, and no fixed-wing aircraft had ever landed in Jamestown area that we know of. There may have been something up towards the Dunkirk area that may have happened with one of the very early airmail, but probably the first flight in Chautauqua County is going to be Al J. Engel and the Bumblebee. So the Bumblebee was a 1910 Curtiss Model E. So it was owned by Al J. Engel of Cleveland, and the Celoron Park actually hired him to come in and give rides on this little plane and to deliver mail around the lake. You can kind of see here, I have some better photos later here, but they would actually strap the person in right next to him, and they'd fly on this little thing, which I'm sure that's very safe. Nice. So some cool photos here, these postcards. You can see it flying over some sail ships there, and then flying by, there's one of the steamers, another steamer there. And they did this all summer, and they gave rides, and they delivered these special postcards. He got a special authorization from the postmaster in Jamestown to be able to actually deliver letters. So we actually had early airmail, and this was in the summer of 1914. So, now for those of you who don't know, Celoron Park, when you walked in here, I'm sure you saw the photos, it used to be an amusement park. And it was owned by the Broadheads. The rides were kind of individually owned. It was kind of a weird setup, but they would hire people to come in for the balloons or for the planes, to get people to go on their trolleys, to get people to go on their steamships, to come to Celoron Park and to spend their money there, obviously. So that's kind of how aviation first got started. Here's a photo of one of the manned balloon ascensions that occurred near the Gravity Railway. And that's how we know it was between 1897 and 1899, because that ride was no longer there after 1899. But that was, again, that was more towards approximately where the park is now, but not too far from here. So the first flights in the county were actually right here, so that's kind of cool. So that's a neat little thing here. But we still don't have an airport of our own here yet until, actually, one thing, here's the bumblebee, and this is them either disassembling it or putting it together in Celoron Park. Algae, a lot of Cleveland there. And it's the bumblebee, so that's what people would ride on. It had a water ski, so you land on the water, but it was a neat little airplane. And that airplane still exists. It is in Cleveland, Ohio, at the Western Reserve Historical Society. So you can actually go there and see that airplane. So it still exists. It actually never flew after that flight. He flew back to Cleveland, and then he just kept it, and it eventually ended up in the museum. It never flew again. I don't know why, but that's, well, probably just extremely unsafe. But now we go to, okay, we need an airport of our own. So the first airport in Jamestown was actually off of Baker Street. Who knew that? Who knew the first airport was by Baker Street? A few people. So, yeah, the present site of Bergman Park. So a little bit backstory on that. So it was located on the former Henry Baker estate, which was then owned by Homer Smith. And about 1923, they decided to, it was about 50 acres of really just brush, and they cleared it out the best they could, took some trees out, and that was the first airport in Jamestown, so, which is pretty cool. So here we have a guy coming into a Waco 10 there, and then there we have, that's actually a Martin MB-1, they call it the Flying Greenhouse. It was one of the first bombers that the U.S. Air Force well, the U.S. Army at the time, ever built. I don't know why it came to Baker Street Airport, but it was there at one point. So it operated from 1923 to 1928. There were a few people that were involved with it. Randy and Wilbur Winslow operated the airport along with Nick Almgren. Now Nick Almgren's an interesting fella. There's actually a photo of him out in the hallway there, and he was called Nerveless Nick, and he would do wing walking stunts over Celoron Park as one of the amusement things back in the 20s. So there's actually a photo of, you can see his face, and he's like hanging off a wing right down the hallway up here. So it's amazing what people did die, but they did it. So they kind of operated the airport, the Winslows and Almgren there, and they had about one hangar. And there was the first plane that operated out of there was a Curtiss JN-4, and it was a Jenny, which was built at the Curtiss Wright factory in Buffalo, New York. So, and that was flown by Len Swanson and Bruce Manley, who were New York State legislators. I've tried to look them up. I can't seem to find if they were. I find references to them. I don't know if they were Assemblymen or Senate. There's some confusion when you get this far back and stuff. But so, however, so this airport operated for a while. They eventually cleared more land out, and probably enough to get that flying greenhouse in there. But the landowner wanted to be paid for the use of this airport, and apparently they didn't want to, so they just abandoned the airport by about 1928. So the airport kind of sat abandoned there. However, it may have been being used unofficially for at least a couple of years after, but officially it closed in 1928. And actually, I got a nice little video here of some planes flying at the Baker Street Airport. So this is right at Bergman Park today. So you can see there's a Waco 10 going towards the trees. Climb, pull up. And that is some sort of a Curtiss Rodden, it looks like. So let's see, he's going to take off here. I don't know, he must be looking south, I think. But it's really cool that this video actually ended up on YouTube of all places. I just happened to stumble across it one day. There's some houses there, so I'm assuming that's looking kind of northish, but flying around there. It's you can see there was some build up here. It's really tough to kind of get the bearings, but this was Bergman Park. As you can see, they didn't have paved runways. It was just basically a giant grass field, and they just landed whatever direction they wanted to. And the video went on to some more stuff after that, but it's on YouTube. If you put in Baker Street Airport on YouTube, you can find that little video I put there. Okay, so let's see. Next up. No, we're going to the next slide. There we go. Okay, so then we get into the North Main Street site, which is where the airport is presently. So prior to the closing of the Baker Street Airport, there was an idea by some Jamestown Planning Commission members, mainly Harvey Osgood and G.W. Codis, and they had this idea of creating a city-run airport. So the Planning Commission let them go out and find several sites. And they enlisted the help of a World War I fighter pilot for the Brits named, what was his name, Frank Garrett. So they looked around for all different kinds of sites, and 16 sites were considered, including one out towards like Kyneton and one at Faulkner. They had little spots everywhere. And the site that Jamestown originally determined to develop was the Baker Street site. So they thought, okay, we'll build the Baker Street site. However, when the Department of Commerce came to investigate the proposed airport, they saw that area as a terrible area for an airport because there is very little room for expansion, and it's right next to a residential neighborhood. So the DOC put the kibosh on that pretty quickly. So they went back and started looking at more sites, and eventually they found the North Main Street site, where it is currently up there on Airport Hill. It was just a big farm at that point, and well, a lot of trees there too. So they then kind of put it to a public bond. It was $150,000 they wanted the city to spend to be able to develop this site. So everybody, they put to vote. It was a kind of a very contentious election. So the majority of people in Jamestown at the time, you have to remember, they didn't have cars. So they're thinking, why are we spending $150,000 for basically just like this? They called it some people call it a playground for the playboys, because that's basically what it was. It was all these private planes, and a lot of people didn't see the business aspect of it, because that really wasn't a thing yet. But so that didn't help the case. And then also some private businessmen offered to kind of develop the Baker Street site. So some people thought, well, we'll just let the private people develop the site, and we don't need we don't need to spend $150,000, which now $150,000 is nothing, but back then obviously that was a lot of money. So it went to a vote, and it failed miserably. So the airport was shot dead in the water. So what Osgood and what's his name? Osgood and Codis decided to do was to raise the money themselves. So they got kind of a who's who of Jamestown together. They got Robert H. Jackson, Oscar Linnea, Fred Galloway, Dr. Blaisdell, John Sheldon, Johnny Trey, and many more people. I'm sure you've heard a lot of those names before. So they got them all together, and they were able to raise $3,500 to purchase the land and start clearing it out, which is what they did. So they kind of cleared it out, and the airport first opened on July 14th, 1931. Was when the current site opened. And at that point, nothing was paved, it was just an open field. But it was open, and there was some flight instruction going on there, and stuff like that, but it still was not a real airport. So they raised another $3,000, and they held a formal opening ceremony the next year on August 20th, 1932. So that was the official opening of the airport. So they finally had an airport open, but it was privately owned. So then in 32 and 33, there were some grants available from the federal government for airports, to build airports. And since Jamestown was privately owned, it could not accept those grants. So the owners of the airport at the time really wanted to give the airport to the city. However, the city did not want it. So in January 2nd, 1934, the board of the Jamestown Airport offered the airport to the city for free to take it, because you could apply for these grants. It's a cool ringtone. So, okay. So 34, it was offered to the city for free. The city rejected it. They didn't want it. Then in the summer of 35, the CWA announced that all applications for airport funding would be due on September 12, 1935 at midnight. So there was a deadline to get this money. And if you remember, this was in the middle of the Great Depression. So jobs were really sought after at this time, and the committee members finally relented and decided, it would create a lot of jobs for the area. And they held an 11 p.m. vote to discuss the takeover of the airport. And while many city council members were against the airport, they decided to vote for it. And one even said, almost apologetically, that he was not voting for an airport; he was voting for the jobs. That's all he was voting for. So when that was done, the airport was finally owned by the city of Jamestown, and the money from the federal government started coming in. So when that happened, the runways were finally expanded and cleared out. And people I found some articles in the newspaper where they got to actually keep the wood. When they would cut the trees down, they could take the wood home with them. That was one of the benefits of working up there. So they cleared out all that land. And then, let's see, okay, we'll get to the next part later. So here's the first, this is a 1931 sectional chart. And you can see that this is the first time that Jamestown appears on the sectional chart. As you can see, there aren't any other airports around. That's pretty much it. Besides some stuff going on out there in Dunkirk, it was pretty much just Jamestown, pretty bare. So, go to my next photo here. Now this is November 4th, 1938 aerial photo. When I first saw this photo, I kept calling it a satellite photo. I'm thinking, wait a minute, how could it be a satellite photo? It's 1938. But it looks like a satellite photo. So you can see the airport kind of under construction here. This is looking north. You can see Kimball stands going up there. So here's the airport as they're building it during the work project there. And now we've got some cool photos of the buildings. So this building was the first building that was constructed up there. It was on the Turner Road side, so closer to Route 60, not where the terminal is now, on the other side of the airport. And you can, the little gas pump there, you can really date it by the cars. So that's a nice little shot. There's another one inside the hangar. So really, really neat. Now this photo, I know it's going to be tough to see, especially for you in the back there, but so this is a 1942 photo, so right before the war, and you can see they've really cleared everything out. I mean, it's amazing if you go up there now how much trees you're going to have. So right here would be the Jamestown Advanced Products Building. Route 60 would be over here. The lake would be over here. So you're looking towards Lake Erie if you need to get yourself oriented, but they really cleared it out, as you can tell. So and there's a little terminal right there. So I've always really liked this photo. Also, something interesting is how the runways are numbered. So normally, when you label runways, you do based on the heading that you're going. So let's say you're going due west, or 270 degrees. The runway would be labeled 227. So, but what they did here was they just labeled them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They just apparently were too lazy. They didn't compass that day. They just decided to go that way. So, but I didn't know that originally. I just happened to come across this photo in the Shock County Archives. So, really interesting. Okay, so now we get into kind of World War II. So, right before the war, Neil McCrae, who was a 1932 Cincinnati Air Race champion, leased the airport from the city, pretty much right after the city took over, and he began to offer flight instruction. It was planning to offer charter service out of there. Although I don't think it ever happened, because I can't seem to find any records of that ever happening. But he was planning to, at least. But then when World War II broke out, Neil McCrae decided to take a commission and left. So then that left, okay, so who's going to lease the airport? Well, the airport was actually leased by a company called American Aviation Corporation. And they had a little top secret project that we're going to talk about here in a second. But the airport then became run by a guy named Warren Skelton. So Warren Skelton came up from Greenville, Pennsylvania, and he took over kind of running the flight training and charters and selling aircraft. And he took over kind of the business side. But the airport was actually leased by the American Aviation Corporation. And what American Aviation Corporation was working on was the TDR-1, which is this plane right here. So this is that remote-controlled drone that they were building up there at the airport. And a lot of Swedes were involved in building this. So the plan was to build basically a flying bomb that they could fly into targets in the Pacific. So, and they picked Jamestown because of the great furniture industry here. So it was all made out of wood. There was a camera in the front. And they would take the pilot part out, put a bomb in there, and then they would fly from the plane. The plan was to fly into Japanese ships or Japanese weapon installments and blow it up. So it was the America's answer to the kamikaze, and it was actually built in Jamestown. At least most of them were. There's somewhere in Illinois, but they were. It was a really neat design and a really cool thing. And Warren Skelton was the test pilot for these. And they were able to be flown. With the pilot would fly to the mission site, and then when they got to the mission site, they would remove that section and put the bomb in there. So that's how they could fly. So, but it was made pretty much out of wood, and then out of bicycle tubing for the rest. So it was a really light aircraft. And the landing gear would because, well, it's not coming back. So the landing gear would actually fall off when it would take off. The landing gear was just there to roll down the runway. It's all it needed to be. So it's only going one way. So that's the TBR-1, and one remains. One is in the Naval Museum in Pensacola, Florida. So if you're ever in Pensacola, Florida, check it out. However, at the Lucille Wright Air Museum, we actually do have a couple parts from it. We have part of the tail, and we have some of the landing gear. So, yeah, we've collected a few things, but there's a few props out there. I know some people have some props in their private collection from it, but it's a really neat aircraft, and they used the durable process to make it. And what's really cool about that building up there where Jamestown Advanced Products is, they actually had a wall to the building. So the people up there knew they were building planes, but a lot of people did not know they were making planes that were going to be remote controlled. So there's like half the building where they were installing all the cameras and stuff like that. The other half of the building where they're just building the aircraft. So really interesting how that worked up there. So it was a super top secret project though. So yeah, there's the plane again. That guy right there is Warren Skelton, so he kind of ran he basically ran the FBO, the fixed base operations up at the airport, selling aircraft. So they were a Stinson dealer and a Piper Cub dealer. So here's kind of the company at least when they started there, that must have been in the late 40s there or something. Maybe mid-40s. So, after the war ends, there's kind of a big boom of aviation pretty much all over the world. We have all these old aircraft and stuff like that. So, the first airline to offer service into Jamestown was an airline called Empire Airlines, which was started by Dino Flange, who was a New York City lawyer and politician and part-time communist. There's kind of a weird story about him in that. But yeah, we'll figure it out now. But I still can't figure it out. But anyways, he started Empire Airlines basically to fly around the state of New York, and he flew to many cities, and Jamestown was one of them. And they began, on December 26, 1945. They started service. I'm not sure if they started into Jamestown that day, or maybe been the day after that. I'm not sure. But I know the airline officially started operations on December 26th. But they operated Cessna Bobcats and Beechcraft 18s, and they flew from Jamestown to Utica, of all places. So Utica was kind of their hub. They fly from all these different upstate airports to Utica, and then from Utica they had one run that ran Utica to LaGuardia. So they get people to New York City that way. So, and actually Elliott Roosevelt, who was the son of President Franklin Roosevelt, was the company's president for a month, and then quit. And then the airline, there was some, I don't think they ever really made money. And they had all kinds of mechanical issues. The planes kept breaking down, and after a mechanical issue at LaGuardia on December 9th, 1946, the airline just ceased operations. So for less than a year, Empire Airlines was in Jamestown. So that was actually the first airline that operated out of here. So, but then we kind of got into All American Airways, which is the precursor to Allegheny. So All American Airways, they operated DC-3s. They could seat 27 passengers, so a lot better than like the eight-seater Cessna that Empire was offering. And they had quite the big route here. So between Buffalo and Pittsburgh was kind of the main route that Jamestown was on. There's Jamestown right there. They'd fly Buffalo, Dunkirk, Jamestown, Bradford, Franklin, Butler, Pittsburgh. And that was the route. Then from there you could go to DC or Cincinnati or wherever you were going to go. So, but these planes were a lot more capable than the planes that Empire was operating. So it worked out a lot better. So then we get into let's see here. So okay, so they inaugurated service in 1949. The city had to spend $115,000 to expand the runways enough to be able to handle the DC-3s into there. And so they operated for a few years, and then in 1953, All American Airlines changed its name to Allegheny Airlines. I'm sure everyone here, who's flown on Allegheny Airlines? Oh yes, yeah, everyone here. I never got to, but. So Allegheny was going to start operating Mark 202s, but even longer ones. They just expanded with the DC-3s, but now they're going to fly these other aircraft, so they need to make the runways even longer. So the city began the project to expand the airport. Now, there was a lot of resistance to this. The city did not want to spend all this money to expand the runways again. And that's where Lucille Wright really came in. So Lucille really fought for the airport. And she was the wife of John Wright, who was the president of Jamestown Telephone Company. And so she got a lot of financial support there from him as well to be able to make this happen. But she was able to really pressure the Carl Sanford administration to make it long enough to keep Allegheny here. Because they did not want to lose airline service. Because once you lose airline service, as we kind of know now, it's very hard to get back. So they were able to get that, and runway 25 and 7 was expanded to 5,300 feet, which is actually its current length. So a bit of a trivia question is always, the main runway at Jamestown has not been expanded since 1957. So, and actually unfortunately there's really no good way to expand it. So a bit of a trivia question there. So and also during that time, the ramp was enlarged. They added 3 gates. So at one point, there was 3 gates at Jamestown where either Allegheny or Mohawk Airlines could park. And then Mohawk began service in 1960. Who ran on Mohawk Airlines? A few people, okay. What's interesting with Mohawk is they weren't here that long. You always hear about Mohawk as like one of the main airlines here, but they really were briefly here, especially compared to Allegheny. But stuff like that. And then in the mid-60s, the secondary runway, which I'll show you a map here in a second, was expanded to its present length of 4,500 feet. So really, no runway at Jamestown has been expanded since the mid-60s, although they have been repaved, of course. But we've had some runoff areas expanded, but the actual runways stayed the exact same length since then. And the reason they expanded that was to cut down on canceled flights due to crosswinds. So we'll go through some photos here, and then we'll get into Chicago Airlines. So here's a neat little photo. So that's either an Allegheny Airlines DC-3 or an All-American Airlines DC-3. I'm not sure exactly what year the photo was taken. You can kind of date it by the cars, but it's tough to tell when you're just dealing with a few years difference. But it's kind of cool that Jamestown Airport on top of the building. Obviously, you can see where north is. So we're looking, the city of Jamestown would be up here. The lake would be over here. Looking at it this way. We had a nice little shack down here where you could go and eat food. Eventually became the Civil Air Patrol. But this is eat, so you can't miss it. So if you're hungry, just fly towards it. No drive-through though. So yes, that was the little ramp right there. You walk out the building, you get on the plane right there. So neat little spot they had. Now here from that same flight, this is looking kind of looking to the northeast at this point. So there's that same building. That photo's kind of washed out, but you can see there's the building where they used to build the drones, the taxiway that goes down to it. So that's that. And as I talked about, the 1957 expansion was spearheaded by Lucille and Wright. They brought the runways to the present length, and they phased out the north-south runway. So this runway, let's see, this one right here was eventually phased out. And that runway is now no longer there. It's now a taxiway. Now this is one of the few photos I have of Lucille. So she's there in the middle, the best clear photo I have of her. This is when she was retiring from Jamestown Telephone Company in April of 1977, sorry. So that's Lucille. And here's a little cartoon of her bugging Carmen Mayor Sanford in his sleep, apparently. There are a ton of these cartoons. It's actually quite amusing how many local political cartoons they used to have back in the paper. But another photo of the expansion. Again, you can kind of see the lake a little bit up here. And there's the terminal again. So they're starting to fill it in. Here's going from the other angle. You can really see the lake there and see the city of Jamestown over here. So that's as they're expanding that finally. So, and then here's a map of what the proposed expansion was going to look like. So they were expanding it out to here. Here's West Oak Hill Road, and then here's Route 60, and then there was Turner Road. But this is the runway that's no longer there. They just expanded this one, and then they cut that out of there. So but that was the master plan when they did that. Then here's a sectional chart. Now, this is from 1965, and you can see a lot more airports have popped up. Stock Lake Airport up there towards Mayville. We have Dart Airport, which Dart Airport everyone knows it's in Mayville now. It was actually on Lynch Road at that time. Kind of a funny little trivia thing. Actually, if you're on Lynch Road, you can actually see the balls on the power lines from when the airport was there. So the balls still bounce off the power lines and they fly in. So, but you can see it has a third runway listed there as well. That was the last time it showed up on this map. Okay, switching gears. Oh, this is a cool one. So anybody remember this sign? A few people do. So yeah, this was on Route 60. As you can see, really neat little sign. This is when Allegheny Airlines and Mohawk Airlines were both there. Now they have a current sign there that's kind of fallen down. Now I'm proposing to them to remake it like this sign, because that's a cool sign. And here's a photo of the terminal building. So this is a really neat one here. So you see it says Allegheny Airlines, Mohawk Airlines. You walk in there. Restaurant was upstairs. Really neat little building. Although I do not have any photos inside that building. I've been trying, but it exists. Here's also that snack shop that's at each side that you saw from the air there. And then there's another view of the hangar. This is a little postcard that you could buy there and send out. Okay, a couple more photos here, then we'll get back to the story. But so this is a neat little shot. So this is on the side of the building there. And flying this plane is Floyd Carlson, who was a local guy who was the test pilot for Bell Aircraft out of Buffalo. This is a prototype Bell helicopter. You can tell it's prototype because none of the Bells ever had wheels. They all had the skids, but for a while they experimented with wheels. So then he ended up flying Lucille Ball when Lucy came to town for the Forever Darling movie years later. But really neat shot. And here's another shot of that same building. And there's that Allegheny, there's the Corsair, so that's a nice plane. So we used to have planes like that flying into Jamestown. It was really cool. And here's a frequent traveler there boarding his Allegheny flight. Okay, Chautauqua Airlines. So now we're getting a little more recent here. So in 1968, the city was starting to get rid of the airport. It was getting tired of spending money for it. The terminal building was in complete disrepair, and something needed to be done. So there was a proposition made to transfer it over to the county. Now the North County did not want this, because the North County said, why are we paying for an airport that's like 40 minutes away from us? They didn't really see the point for it, obviously, but the county ended up accepting it. And on January 1st, 1971, the county took control of the Jamestown Airport. So after that happened, the new terminal building off of Airport Drive, off of West Oak Hill Road, was constructed. That's the same building that's there right now. It's been expanded in the 80s, but it's in the same exact spot. Here was the grand opening when they first opened it. And then there was some threat from Allegheny. Allegheny was going to pull out of Jamestown. So Joel Hall, who was a Mohawk Airlines captain out of Utica, decided to start Chautauqua Airlines. Now, Chautauqua Airlines would fly under the Allegheny name. So it was Allegheny commuters. Well, it really wasn't an Allegheny flight. It was actually a Chautauqua Airlines flight. And that was one of the first examples of code sharing in the United States. So most of the time, when you're getting on an airline today, a lot of it's not operated by who you think it is. So if you get on a Delta flight, it may be operated by Republic or Envoy or any of these small or Piedmont. It's usually operated by a smaller carrier that uses the bigger name. So it's kind of like a franchise type deal. So, and this is one of the first examples of the U.S. was with Chautauqua Airlines doing that. So Joel and Gloria Hall started that, and this was their first flight on August 1st, 1974. And that was a Beechcraft 99, and that was en route to Pittsburgh. And here are Joel and Gloria Hall here. Now this is a little later, because this was the Metro liner that they had. And then who remembers the shorts? Yeah, we were looking at a flying boxcar, but it's definitely unique. So here's shoveling some snow after either they're boarding or disembarking, not sure. So also in this time period, the current terminal was, as I said, constructed in 1972, and pretty much all the commercial operations were moved up there. But the building down off of Route 60 stayed there and kind of was the private aviation kind of area. That's where kind of all the flight instruction happened, all the maintenance kind of happened down there. So you kind of had two sections of the airport. You had the West Oak Hill Road side and the Route 60 side. And there was a lot of opposition to moving it over there because I don't know if anyone's ever been up to the airport now, but there is really no good place to view anything anymore. While down by Route 60, you get all kinds of great kind of ways to watch the airplanes come in. But when you're up at the current terminal, you're kind of out of the action quite a bit, where you can't see too much. So that eventually happened, and okay, now we'll get into something that's going to interest this group a lot: the King of Sweden. So the King of Sweden. The King of Sweden, let's see, first tried to get in here on April 25th, 1976. So King Carl Gustaf was on a world tour and was to visit Jamestown, good old Jamestown. So the Viking Male Chorus and the Jamestown Municipal Band were ready to greet him. Mike Yeager was standing there all excited and giddy and everything. So the King's coming in. However, at that time, what are the odds? They were repaving the main runway. So the main runway, which is 25 and 7, was closed. And that is the only runway that had the precision landing system to be able to get down through the weather. So they only had the smaller runway available. And he was a Learjet, so it was a very capable aircraft. And they did multiple approaches to runway 31. But they just, whenever they got down, they weren't able to see the runway. So they had to go around and try the approach again, and the weather just never cleared. So they had to divert to Bradford, and the King had to be drove to Jamestown via car. So they had a little diversion there. But all's not lost, because on October 22nd, 2011, the Norden Club got him here finally. So here's some photos from that. At the airport, he had a charter King Air, and here's him in front of Chautauqua Aircraft Sales. All that building's there. So that was really neat. You guys were able to get back in because the first time that was kind of a big letdown. Of course, the bigger runway was closed, and then only in Jamestown. So. And here's a little article from the Post-Journal. It's off of the microfilm at the library, so I apologize for the quality, but very defeated crowd at airports, so everyone's sitting there kind of sad. Everyone's already, nothing happened. Here's another shot of the airport. This is a lot like how it looks today, minus this building's all gone. So this is kind of the main runway here. So what happened to this is, so Jamestown Aviation Company, run by Warren Skelton, he ended up, he lost his next bid when his contract was up, and JHW Aerospace Corp, run by Pete Siriano, took over kind of the FBO, selling fuels, flight instruction, all that. He took that out of that building, and he operated that for quite a while until, 1988, when United Jet Center came in, and United Jet Center then tore this building down. They built a new FBO right up in the middle between those two hangars there, and that's when they began selling fuel. And they did that until the year 2000, when the Nelbone family brought back the name Jamestown Aviation Company. It had nothing to do with the original Jamestown Aviation Company, and they kind of operated FBO service up until last year when Centric Aviation took it over. And then that brings us to the present day. The present day, so we have a lot of businesses operating up there. We have Majestic Aviation, who I work for. We have Chautauqua Aircraft Sales and Dunkirk Avionics. So they do kind of maintenance and also avionics upgrades for lots of places. Chase Aviation, which sells and brokers aircraft. Centric Aviation, which sells the fuel, runs the hangars and all that stuff. And Luscombe Aircraft, which is building actual airplanes off of Turner Road there in Jamestown. So check them out, because that's really cool. And they are still working on being the airline. So we're slowly working on that. And yeah, so here's kind of a map I can kind of show you, because this is a present-day kind of Google Earth map of where everything is. So there's FedEx, and then you get into some general aviation hangars, the FBO, Chautauqua Aircraft Sales, the terminal, and then another hangar. Then Luscombe is up here off of Turner Road, the old AVM hangar that's kind of storage right now, and the old terminal used to be right here. And then over here we have a Jamestown Gas Products. That's where they were building the drones. So. Yep, and we're going to go back to this photo. So as you can see, this photo must have been in the late 80s, early 90s, because that building was torn down in the early 90s. It's surprisingly, something that happened so recently, I can't find a lot of good information on it for some reason, of the exact date that building came down, but it's always something weird. But as you can see, they expanded it, and then they eventually put a taxiway to connect here to the end of the runway. So this is all gone now. It's just a straight taxiway through. And then they have moved Turner Road a little bit more down here, kind of down the hill a little bit more since then. But otherwise, it's pretty much stayed relatively the same. So get to the next part. Questions. Does anybody have any questions? I know I covered a lot there. And I wanted to kind of get the whole story in. So any questions that may have? Yes.
When did they build the tunnel, and where is that located?
So the tunnel's on West Oakland Road. The tunnel was built in the early 2000s, and it was somewhere in that time period. But a misconception is that the runway's above it. It is not. It's just grass above it. Now, the county kind of screwed themselves when they built it, because they did not build the tunnel to the proper weight rating to have a runway on top of it. So if they ever do want to expand it, they have to rebuild the entire tunnel. So it's a bit of a controversy up there about it. They should have built the tunnel to be able to handle any weight. So they can't expand that way without redoing the tunnel, and they can't expand going the other way because it really slopes down there going towards Route 60. So unfortunately, we're kind of stuck with the current length at the airport. So, other questions? Yes.
Current business is listed as Majestic Airlines.
Majestic Aviation.
Aviation.
Yeah. Oh, that's we're a flight school.
Oh.
So we teach people how to fly. So we have five airplanes. So yeah, of course. But possible airlines in the future, they're working on it. Just need to get the government to go for it. Anybody else have any questions?
Do they have any possible contracts for airlines? I remember, Junior, back in the day when I was a go-big girl, I was in and out of that airport, and there was coming people all the time.
Yeah, Melvin Barbie over there.
And they had flights that ran the whole day.
Yeah. Oh, you used to be able to go. You used to be able to go to New York, come back. Yeah, it was nice, but they're trying. But it's the problem is the federal government doesn't seem to want to fund it because it's all funded through the Essential Air Service Act. However, they view it as well. You guys are close enough to you're close enough to Buffalo where you don't really need air service here, and that goes back even to when they did the study in 1957. They interviewed people for it, and it's funny. You'll see the same comments like, "Oh, flights were always canceled because of weather. It's just easier to drive to Buffalo." So it's the same stuff. Stuff never changes. So unfortunately.
Say that the flights were always canceled because they had a good run.
Oh yeah, well. Oh yeah, there was a good run there for a little while. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh.
Luscombe,
Yeah.
have they produced planes yet?
They are within months of completing their first aircraft. Now, Luscombe's an old name, so Luscombe goes back even into the 40s, but they just own the name to Luscombe and all the parts and stuff like that, and the patents and stuff. But they have the wings and they have the fuselage, and they just need to make it into one thing. But they'll have a plane out before like Halloween, they're even saying so. Yep.
My mother used to talk about going up to Berkeley Park.
Yeah.
Baker Street, and seeing a pilot there that had flown overseas. Now, would that be Charles Lindbergh by any chance? Did you ever hear that there's anybody famous that was up there?
It's definitely possible because again, there's that photo of the flying greenhouse there, which I don't know why that was there. I also have a photo of the Goodyear blimp at the Baker Street Airport for some reason. So apparently it was a place people went. So it's possible. It's definitely possible. But I don't have any report. I don't have any news on that. Something if you ever know someone that has a lot of money, they want to donate something. Let's get the Post Journal digitized so you can actually key search it versus going to the microfilm and having to look at it. I'm probably the only 28-year-old that knows how to work a microfilm machine because of this project. So, and then you had a question?
What's the largest aircraft that can land up there now, practically?
Well, that's a tough question because.
Yeah, I know. I mean, passenger aircraft, say.
Well, again, the problem with that question is it might be able to land there, but it might not be able to take back off. So, yeah. So, oh yeah, no. It's probably a Global 500 business jet would probably be the biggest one that they get in there, which flies in there regularly. Also, Cummins bought, I think it's it's some sort of Embraer business jet that Cummins bought, and I think I was told that was that they found the biggest plane they could get in here because obviously they're in there quite a bit, and so that was so I forgot the exact model on that. It doesn't have a fun name; it's just a bunch of numbers, but it's some Embraer business jet. But it's a huge airplane. So sometimes you'll see it flying over or something like that if you're just hanging out in Lakewood or something or Jamestown. Does that answer your question? Sorry, I don't have an exact answer for you on that. But any others? Mike again?
You were going to discuss
Oh, yeah, so the Jamestown Airport, JHW, one thing I get a lot from my students is they're like, okay, well, why is there an H in it? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, shouldn't it be like JMW or something like that? Because most airports, like, Buffalo's BUF, Erie's ERI, Miami's MIA. So you would think like, oh, why, so where's the H come from? But it's actually named for John H. Wright. It's actually his initials, Lucille's wife, and he was one of the first donors for the airport. So they named the airport after him. It just happened to be that there was a JW there too. Weird coincidence. Any more questions? Yes.
I forget, do the planes out of the airport always take off in the same direction?
No. So you take off, you want, in theory, you want to take off into the wind the best you can. Sometimes it's not possible, but you get the best direction you can, which is why there was a theory back in the day where we're like, okay, well, crosswind landings are tough. So we're just going to build a runway in every direction and you never have to deal with it. Which is smart, but it solves the problem, but it's also, you're wasting a lot of pavement for that. So they eventually just, as plane technology evolved, they were able to handle it better. But if you look at some old like Army airfields, they'll have like a circle of runways, so you can land in whatever direction you want. You're always landing or taking off into the wind. So, any others? Good. Well, thank you guys so much. I'm glad I didn't put you to sleep. And thanks for listening.